On his 76th birthday, a man named Sid looked back over his life and decided that it was time for something new. He thought about it carefully and then realized he already knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to make a great red wine.
But to make a great wine, you need great grapes. And for great grapes, you need the right soil. And the right climate.
Sid got in his car with his wife Mavis and travelled the wine regions of southeastern Australia. Tasmania was beautiful but too cold. New South Wales was too humid. Victoria was, well, Victoria. And then an old friend showed him some land in South Australia's Coonawarra, and he was hooked by that magic curve of Terra Rossa soil snaking through the low hills.
It's got a kind of humus smell about it.
He made all the equipment for the winery himself. He designed the winery and built it, and called it Leconfield. And he made his classic red wine.
But to tell the story properly, we have to go right back to the beginning of South Australia. I'm here at the Maritime Museum in Port Adelaide, where they have a model of one of the first ships to come to the colony. Let's have a look. The 190-ton Duke of York was originally a two-masted sailing packet running between Falmouth and New York. Here she is. They added an extra mast here and made her into a bark for the trip down under. And on board was cabin boy William Hamilton.
And this is where the Duke of York arrived, Reeves Point on Kangaroo Island. The Duke of York was the first of the pioneer ships to land in South Australia, reaching Kangaroo Island before even the founder of Adelaide, Colonel William Light, arrived in 1836. William's father, Richard, a tailor by profession, living with his family in Dover, already had a working relationship with wine. He had a side business that took him down to the coast at night, where he would pick up deliveries of contraband Bordeaux from France. Moonlighting, you might call it.
Voici l'argent. Franc Napoleon. C'est tout.
Business had been brisk, but recently the constabulary had been taking a worrying interest in his activities. So when young William returned from the Antipodes with glowing reports of South Australia, his father felt that perhaps emigration might be a prudent option. On the 26th of June, 1837, only 7 months after the colony had been founded, the family set sail from England.
Richard Hamilton, his wife Anne, and their 8 children were aboard the Catherine Stewart Forbes, bound for South Australia. The voyage was a comfortable one for the family. Richard described it as a delightful passage of 16 weeks. They landed at Holdfast Bay and walked along this route to the site of Adelaide, along what Richard describes as an unknown road through marshes and bogs without a single house or passenger to be met to inquire if we were right or wrong. It's a bit different today.
They set up tents for the family on Pinky Flat by the River Torrens. Here they learned that the surveyors were severely behind in their work, and they might have to wait months before they could claim their land. Jobs were scarce, but Richard's son John managed to obtain a position with Colonel Light's surveying team. One day he came to his father and excitedly told him that he had seen some excellent land on the Sturt River and that it was available for selection. This is Colonel Light's surveying map of the Adelaide region, and here's the block they selected, section 148. You can see that it straddles the Sturt River.
The soil in the Sturt River Valley is rich and well drained. All the land around here is good. It's the old floodplain. Just look at this. Good stuff. The rich, fertile soil on either side of this river supports a lot of life. And section 148 would have been an 80-acre farm block right here in Marion.
The family set out from Adelaide with all their worldly goods loaded on a bullock cart.
They camped their first night here, under this very gum tree, still standing after all these years on what was then called the Adelaide Road. Now it's Oaklands Road.
Because of the delays in surveying the land, Richard was worried that he might run out of money before the farm was able to support his family. He wrote to a friend in South Africa for help. He also asked, "And would you kindly send a few vine plants, as the health of the family requires a little wine?" He might have added that it wouldn't do the health of the colony any harm either.
The vines arrived 3 months later and were planted in the winter of 1838. Although the grapes only formed a small part of the farm's produce, this was a significant moment because it marked the beginning of Richard's career as a vigneron. When the grapes were harvested and the first wine was produced in 1841, mainly for family use but also to be sold locally, the Hamilton family made their first entrance onto the stage as winemakers.
The local church was St. Mary's on the Sturt, where the family worshipped and where Richard was buried when he died in 1852. A simple sandstone headstone, ravaged by time, but you can still make out some of the inscription. While Richard was the pioneer of the family tradition, it was his son Henry who built it into a business.
This is Morford Road, leading down to Oaklands Road down there. The original family holding was on that side of the road, between here and the Sturt River.
In 1854, Henry bought more land on the other side of Morford Road.
He named it Ewell after the small village of Ewell near Dover, where the family had owned an orchard. He planted vines and built his wine cellars here. There's not much to show for it now, but this is the laneway where the trolley loads of grapes were brought in every harvest for about 150 years. Henry married the girl next door, Mary Bell.
Her father owned the adjoining section, 149.
This is the house that Henry built her, with pug and pined bedrooms. And if we walk round here, we can see the fine bluestone front that he put on the house years later, in the 1890s. And here, amazingly, are some of the original vines that he planted here in the Yule vineyard. Over the years, Henry's hard work paid off. For 2 consecutive years, he won first prize for his farm, awarded by the Royal Agricultural and Horticultural Society.
The award citation read, "The vineyard consists of about 40 acres, 20 acres of Pedro Ximenez vines, 4 years old, and 20 acres of good wine and table grapes." Pedro Ximenez are white grapes, scarcely seen today, but grown everywhere during the 19th and first half of the 20th century. They were used to make fortified wines and sherries. The Hamilton winery produced ports, muscats, dry sherries and sweet white wine, many of them based on the Pedro grape. Henry's son Frank took over from his father in 1890. Frank was the entrepreneur, the man who really grew the company into a leading South Australian business.
Frank made additions to the front of the house that Henry had built back in 1854. Frank married Violet Ayliffe, great-granddaughter of Lord Egremont of Petworth and Leconfield, who happened to be the patron of great English painter J.M.W. Turner. I wonder if they had one of his paintings. It's possible. Oh my goodness, 2 Turners on the wall. They're only prints, but why not?
One afternoon, the family was surprised by the arrival of an unexpected visitor.
Frank! Who is this man?
Who are you? I am a winemaker. I am Richard. I am from Switzerland. I need your help. What is your business?
Apparently, he'd jumped ship in Port Adelaide and wanted the family to hide
In
him.
Europe, I am very good. I can teach you many things about winemaking.
He said he was Swiss and that he knew all about
But
winemaking.
you must hide me first, please.
Come with me.
Frank always felt sorry for these men.
You are a good man.
If they were caught, they were in for a rough return voyage and no pay. And they were often good workers.
No,
We haven't seen him anywhere. No.
So when the troopers came, they hid him in the hay shed. They never did manage to pronounce his name. He was always called the Swiss. But he knew how to make wine, and he was a godsend to Frank.
Frank expanded the area under vines. This is a vineyard that he planted on the corner of Oaklands Road and Western Avenue in 1903. That makes these vines more than a century old and still going strong. The grapes are Grenache and Shiraz, and they're currently being used by a winery down in Glenelg. Just have a look at this. Just look at this trunk, over 100 years old. Look how gnarly she is. Beautiful. Frank also built the family's first underground cellars, which enabled him, with the help of the Swiss, to make a dry, white Chablis wine using the Pedro Ximenez grapes. Under Frank, the family vineyards reached their fullest extent, over 63 hectares.
Frank died unexpectedly in 1913. Things had been going well. He'd made £11,000 that year, enough to buy a sheep station at the time. But his sudden death at the age of 54 brought the business to its knees.
Frank's eldest sons were still too young to step into his shoes. Eric was 17 and his brother Sidney was only 14.
The public trustees were called in, and they struggled to keep the business going for the next 6 years. When the First World War broke out, Eric enlisted. He fought through the entire war, first in Gallipoli and then in the trenches of the Western Front. He was lucky to survive. He was wounded by shrapnel twice and gassed so badly that he had to be repatriated to England on 2 occasions. Young Sidney had always dreamt of a life on the ocean waves, like his great-uncle William on the Duke of York. As soon as he could, he left school and signed up on the Chilternford, carrying grain between Port Adelaide and Plymouth.
It was a great life. Always wet with icy water. Freezing seawater it was. And you couldn't wait for the food to come out of the galley. The smell was so bad. Yeah, well, romance of the sea. I was soon cured.
Sid rounded the tip of South America in a sailing vessel. Not once, but several times. And in doing so, joined the elite group of men known as Cape Horners. Somehow, the company managed to survive this precarious period. And in 1919, Eric came home to work for it, alongside Sid, who had already returned from the sea. Eric, as the older brother, became managing director, and the company flourished again under his stewardship. He also became the marketer par excellence of the company. During the war, he had been repatriated to London several times and had seen the prices of the French and Portuguese wines on sale there. He saw a great business opportunity because he knew that Australian wines could be sold there at a lower price but still make a good profit. At that time, there was no export market to speak of. Eric seized the opportunity. He spent over 6 months of each year abroad marketing, with great success. He maintained a flat in London and made an astonishing 15 trips to Canada. He even shipped his own Jaguar to Canada and the UK to drive around in. And it's not only Hamilton wines that he promoted. It's now widely acknowledged that thanks to his promotional tours, he encouraged a wider acceptance of Australian wines in general overseas. An aerial photograph was taken of the area in the 1930s. You can see it's pretty well all vineyards. Here's block 148 with the Sturt River running through it. The first home would have been around here. This is the Ewell Vineyard, and here's Henry's house with all the winery buildings around it. Here's Sidney's house, and down here, across Oaklands Road, is Eric's house. Here's the view in the 1960s. The Sturt River's been replaced by a concrete drain. The winery is now under siege from the suburbs, and Sidney's house has been replaced by a shopping centre. And the view today, it's all gone, except for Henry's house, and even Eric's house is still there. And here we are, Eric's house, just across Oaklands Road from the old winery. This is where he lived during the 6 months of the year that he wasn't overseas. Eric's wife, Doreen, was a keen horsewoman. Eric and Doreen had 2 children, Robert and Susie, as well as a pet kangaroo and a koala. Doreen was a keen gardener. She made sure there were always fresh flowers on the table. This is the view of the winery from Eric's veranda, filmed by Eric himself. Not far from Eric's house, there's a remnant of a vineyard that can give us a glimpse back into this time in Australian wine history, a time when wine styles and the grapes grown to make them were dramatically different to what they are today. But these old vines don't look anything like a modern vineyard.
No, they don't. They're quite different. What do you notice in particular about them?
They're just so low.
Yeah, they are, aren't they? As you can see, they're less than a metre off the ground.
Back-breaking work.
It would be. The other thing you notice, there's no trellising.
Dr. Geoffrey Bishop is a wine historian, and he's going to try to identify the grapes that are still growing here and that were commercially harvested in the heyday of Marion's vineyards.
Come around this one, have a look at this one here.
Are we likely to find Pedro grapes here, do you think?
I'd be surprised if we've got any Pedro here. Just on a quick look.
On the other side of Marion, in a quiet spot by the river, we discover another patch of living archaeology.
So these vines have been here unworked for the last 40 years?
Yeah, 40 years.
How have they survived?
Oh, vines are tough.
But is this another muscat?
No, I don't think it is. I think we've found what we're looking for. This is Pedro. We got it. We got it.
How can you tell?
It's quite a distinctive grape. It has an elongate bunch. This has oval berries. The berries are quite small. That's quite distinctive.
Yeah.
And they're really soft. See the soft of feel?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Eric's younger brother Sidney took over the winemaking side of things while Eric was busy running the company.
Hello. Hello, I look for the owner.
Yes, I'm the owner.
Nice to meet you. I am John Seck.
John Seck,
He was aided by an emigre Russian winemaker named John Zake, who taught him much of what he knew.
Zake dropped by the winery just after Eric and I had taken over and tasted some of the wines. He said, they're in need of some improvement. And quick as a flash, he outlined what we should do to render the vats of wine more palatable and therefore more marketable.
Nice, good color.
He made a deep impression on me, both as a man and for his instant appraisal of the true quality of wines.
Thank you.
So what do you think of that?
And so we embarked on a voyage which was to endure for the remaining years of his life.
This could do with some improvement. I can see you are a passionate man about making wine. This is most important when you make the wine. Passion. But at this stage, we introduce the older elements. Merging old with new. Like me and you. Okay?
John? Call me Sydney.
Thank you, Sydney.
In 1928, Sid and Zake pioneered a new type of wine for Australia, a wine that would become famous as Hamilton's Yule Moselle.
I'd been concerned for years about a vineyard of Pedro Jimenez and Verdelho. The Oakland's vineyard, I think it was. Yes. Well, the grapes produced well enough, but they never measured more than 10 degrees of Beaumet, which is a lot lower than the 13 degrees we needed to make a decent sweet white wine. The grapes were growing on alluvium gravel, which I think was the bed of the River Sturt in ancient times.
And this is the exact location of that unusual vineyard, just off the Oaklands Road. I wonder if the people here realise the special quality of their soil. Hi there, how are you going?
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you. So you garden here for a number of years?
Yes, we have.
And how do you find the going?
Well, it's fairly hard, really, because the soil's dry and it needs mulching.
Have you ever tried growing grapes?
No, I haven't.
Well, did you know that this soil raised some of the vines of the most famous Australian wines in history?
No.
And it tasted just like French champagne. Would you like to try some?
Yes, please. Cheers.
Cheers. Your very good health. Back in 1926, Eric had just sent Sid a case of French champagne, and Sid was struck by the similarity of its taste to the wines grown in this difficult vineyard.
So I thought, why don't we make a champagne-style wine, which is what we did. We picked the grapes early when they were still acid, and we fermented them in hogsheads under pressure. What we ended up with was a slight sparkling wine, much like champagne, fairly light, easy to drink, a little bit tart. It reminded me of the wines of the Moselle area in Germany, so we named it Yule Moselle. Took the public a little while to get accustomed to it, but when they did, it went like wildfire. It became Hamilton's and Australia's top-selling wine.
One of the things Sydney pioneered when making this wine was the idea of using closed vats for fermentation. Possibly he did it because he wanted to ferment under pressure to produce the slight spritzing in the wine. So instead of using open concrete tanks, as was the practice at the time, he had the idea of using closed vats for fermenting before barreling the wine for storage. But the other effect of keeping the wine under pressure and the lid tightly sealed was that the air was kept out and oxidation was reduced enormously.
This improved the quality of the wine and was one of the reasons why the Moselle turned out so crisp and light. It was a milestone in Australian wine history, and in time, sealed fermentation would become standard industry practice.
Sid had a talent for engineering and a love of innovation, and he combined the two to design and build all the equipment for the winery.
Sid delighted his family with his engineering skills too. He built his children a fully operational motor car with its own petrol engine. Daughter Diana makes reversing look like child's play. Sid's house was set in the Ewell vineyards. This is his wife Mavis, his daughter Diana setting off for school a few years later with sister Anthea, and as at home on a bike now as she was in a little car. Son Reg. And here's Diana again. She's graduated to a horse now. She certainly liked to get around. And Anthea is along for the ride too. And a glimpse of Sid himself. As the years went on, Sid continued to work on improving the Ewell Moselle. He was constantly trying to refine the quality of this wine. In 1935, he even made a trip to France to study French winemaking techniques.
To be frank with you, winemaking was a bit touch and go in those days. Wasn't in our blood like it is with the French. Things hadn't changed much since Henry's day, and dry reds and whites were still being fermented in open fermentation tanks all over the place. With the fortified wines, we added large doses of grape spirit when half the sugar had fermented away. This was more of an antiseptic, really, otherwise the wine would have very quickly become unsound. Of course, we couldn't do that with the table wines. No antiseptic, so it was open season for the bacteria. That's why so many Australian table wines were undrinkable. In fact, if you were doing really well if you managed to make even a mediocre wine. It's no wonder the public preferred the beer. The bête noire of the South Australian autumn is the heat, just when the vintage is entering the tanks. The heat of February and March means that the bacteria spreads unchecked, not like the autumn in France, which is much cooler. In fact, sometimes it even snows. So what to do? Well, we tried everything. So I rode away to France for some texts, and some time later a whole box of books arrived. But unfortunately, they were all in French. So I had to teach myself French in order to read them. And I'll tell you, by the time I read the last one, my French had really improved, and so had my winemaking.
Voilà.
At the same time, I delved into the work of Louis Pasteur, who demonstrated the need and the importance of a pure yeast culture. Not an easy thing to make. You need a damn good microscope and the skill to use it. In the end, I decided that temperature control was the only way we were going to be able to achieve a really sound white wine. And to do that here, it meant we had to use refrigeration. So in 1935, I began to experiment.
Sid built brick and concrete tanks like these and installed a 10-ton refrigerator. He filled the tanks up with the hot wine and lowered a copper coil into each one with cold brine circulating through it. The temperatures dropped as if by magic.
However, to his great dismay, the wine came out cloudy. He delved back into his French wine library and found that the problem was casse cuivreuse. The presence of copper and exposure to air were breaking the wine. So it was back to the drawing board.
Well, the other wineries laughed at me, said I was wasting my time, I would go broke. But I didn't give up, I kept on. And in 1944, we dug a new cellar.
This is the site of the old Huell winery. Not much remains today. All the hustle and bustle is gone. Now it's just a quiet retirement village. But there's still something left. Come with me. Tucked away between these two units is something very unusual. Something out of the past. These steps lead down to the cellar that Sid excavated in 1944. Amazingly, it's still here. We had no idea. We only discovered it when we were doing the research for this film. So here it is, and you can see how huge it is. It's about 30 meters long and about 15 meters wide, and it would have been much deeper. This isn't the real floor. This is just some earth that someone's put in here to fill it up for some reason. In fact, the real floor is another 6 meters below this. So you can imagine how huge this space was. And sturdily built too. Just look at these concrete pillars. But that's only half the story. Because the real innovation by Sid is that he chilled this cellar. And to find out how, we need to make the trip to the Adelaide Hills, to Chamberlain's orchards. A cellar's all very fine, but on the hot Adelaide plains, temperatures would still soar in there after vintage. Hi there, I'm looking for Damien McCall.
Yes, I'm Damien.
Hi there, I'm Charles.
Good to meet you, Charles.
Thank you so much for having us in here today.
No worries at all.
So you're going to show us the ammonia compressor?
I will. We'll head down to the compressor room and I'll show you where it all happens.
Thank you. Sid needed to refrigerate the cellar, and he bought himself a brand new Werner ammonia compressor to do this. Just like this one. This might not be new, but it's the same model that Sid installed at Marion, and it's still doing the job here 70 years later. Chamberlains are using it to cool the rooms where they store their pears, and they have pretty much the same setup as Sid pioneered for his cold cellar in 1944. So how does it work, Damien?
Okay, so the gas comes in through this pipe here from the cool rooms as a low pressure gas. It then runs through the compressor, comes out as a high pressure gas on this side, and then don't touch that, it's hot.
Sorry.
And then it runs from there outside through the evaporator unit and then gets cooled down and changes its state to a liquid.
Oh, this is freezing. How'd you get it so cold?
Okay, this is where the ammonia gas comes into the room, inside the pipes up in the roof. There's a lot of ice on those pipes. The ammonia gas pretty much takes the heat out of the room and keeps it at a temperature of probably around about 0 to -1.
Wow, cool. And you keep that going all year round, do you?
Yep, all year round while we've got fruit in storage. So I thought you would have been used to this, Charles.
This is awful. Brilliant. Cool, thank you. So there you have it, Sid's cold cellar. When he built it back in 1944, it represented a seismic shift in winemaking. Nothing would ever be the same again. Temperature-controlled fermentation and storage.
Well, that was the answer to all our problems. And the Huell Moselle, which was a good wine, now became a great wine, refined and elegant. now we could capitalize on it and realize its full potential. And it went like wildfire. We could never make enough of it. We're always short of it from the day it went onto the market.
Why limit the method to whites? They applied it to red winemaking next, and soon the Hamilton Clarets and Hamilton Burgundies were being noticed for their elegance of style. It was a revolution, really.
Once Sid had shown the way and had the results to prove it, the other wineries soon caught on. Penfolds, Tolley's, Ranella, Yalumba and Lindemans were soon installing their own refrigeration equipment and setting up temperature control. And during the next decade, wineries all over the country began pulling up their Pedro vines, their Dorodillo and their Palomino, and began replacing them with red and white table wine varieties. The Australian wine revolution had begun.
By the mid-40s, John Zake had been retired for some time, but another talented foreigner soon turned up, the Frenchman, Maurice Hou. He had been working in Borneo when the Japanese invaded and captured it during the war. He was taken prisoner with his family and was on the point of being executed when the island was liberated by the Australians, in the nick of time as far as he was concerned. He found a bottle of Hamilton's whiskey discarded by the Australian troops. He wrote to the address on the label, saying he was a winemaker with French qualifications. On the basis of that, Sid offered him a job. And so Hamilton's, as if by fate, got itself its third-generation European winemaker.
Maurice Hou learned winemaking in the ancient vineyards of Montpellier in southern France and graduated from the agricultural college there, which specializes in enology, the science of winemaking. He came here in 1946 to stay just 2 years. But every summer since then, as the grapes fill with juice, he's lived close to the vines, tasting and waiting.
What do you think? They are ready to pick. If it rains, it will be bad. I say we start the vintage.
Maurice Hou and Sid worked very closely, and with Maurice's input, Sid was able to continue in his quest to perfect the Ewell Moselle. The wine was enormously improved after the introduction of the cold cellar. Now Sid wanted to take things a step further. At the time, he was, of course, making the wine mainly from the Pedro grapes grown at Marion.
Then Sid heard of a winery and vineyards available at Springton in the Eden Valley. Springton had a German heritage. Herwig's Tree, just outside town, had sheltered a pioneering German family for 2 years after they first arrived in 1860. St. Johannes Lutheran Church stood on what's now known as Hamilton's Road. And perhaps of most interest to Sid, the Barossa Germans had been growing Riesling grapes here in this higher, cooler valley since the 1850s.
Of course, Riesling is the grape variety that grows along the Moselle River in Germany. The German Moselle wines are made from Riesling grapes.
And so Sid saw a great opportunity, a chance to improve his own Moselle even further. Sid bought the winery in 1948 and began experimenting with replacing some of the rather neutral-tasting Pedro grapes from Marion with the much more flavoursome grapes from Springton.
It worked. The Ewell Moselle continued to improve in quality, and in a few years, Sid and Maurice got the balance just right. Roger Warren, chief winemaker at Hardy's and recognised as one of Australia's greatest winemakers, famously declared that the 1955 Ewell Moselle was the best white wine ever made in Australia. The Springton Winery is a grand old building from the 1890s.
It's been disused for many years and has hardly changed since Sid's day. This steelwork would have been cut, welded and installed by Sid himself from Port Kembla beams to carry the vast 5,000-gallon vats he used. The setup is the same as it would have been at Marion, but the beauty is it's all still here. There are even some vats left. If we climb through this little space, here we are. These are the 5,000-gallon vats used both here and at Marion. Notice that they're on their sides. This is a house style, possibly unique to the Hamiltons, but Sid had a reason for doing it this way. Sid always had a reason.
Sid found that by laying the vats on their sides and tilting them slightly with the bunghole at the top, he could reduce the exposed surface area, resulting in less ullage, better wine.
If I pull out this stopper and I look in through the manhole, I can see that the bunghole is at the very top, at the back, the highest point in the vat. There would have been an identical set of vats down here, each one directly below its settling vat above. The grape juice would have been gravity-fed down into these fermenting vats. This is where the grape juice became wine. Despite Eric and Sydney's uniquely successful partnership, a marketing genius on the one hand, a brilliant winemaker on the other, in the 1950s the two men fell out. The matter couldn't be resolved, and Sydney resigned from the company in 1955.
He took up some land in Happy Valley, planted vines, and for the next 25 years, led the life of a vigneron. The family company came under considerable pressure after the split. Urban sprawl was lapping up against the vineyards. The winery was under siege. Hamilton's Yule vineyards were finally bought out by Mildara Wines in 1979. Meanwhile, Sydney's nephew Richard Hamilton, the first of the family to share the name of their pioneering forefather, was developing an interest in winemaking. He was a talented medical student, but had been inspired by his uncle's achievements and hoped to combine winemaking with a medical career.
During my school days, I was often down at the winery helping out in the laboratory. Later at university, during holidays, I worked a couple of vintages under the guidance of Morrisou.
Richard's father, Burton, who was Sid's brother, was involved in the family business and had vineyards of his own at McLaren Vale. When he realized Richard was serious about winemaking, he let him have a couple of acres to set up a winery. Sid couldn't resist stepping in to help. He designed the equipment and built a crusher. Richard Hamilton Wines opened its doors in 1972.
I was still studying surgery at the time, both in Australia and then overseas. But luckily my father Burton stepped into the breach and took upon his shoulders the whole running of the place for some years. And then I returned as a newly qualified plastic surgeon, and I was able to turn my attention to the winery.
His involvement in setting up Richard Hamilton's winery awakened in Sid a desire to try his hand at winemaking again. But this time, he would do something different.
I was 76 years old, and I thought, I'd really like to make a damn good red. before I give it all away.
He bought a plot in the Coonawarra. He prepared the land himself and planted his first vines in 1975. He called his winery Leconfield, after the estate of Lord Egremont, the family's illustrious ancestor with the Turner connection. In 1977, Sid harvested his first crop of Cabernet grapes. 1978 was an excellent year. 1979 was such a poor vintage that he didn't make any red wine at all.
And the 1980 vintage was terrific. My wines caused quite a stir. Especially this one. Brought a bit of attention to the Coonawarra. I thought, well, I'm happy. I've done what I set out to do.
After having achieved his ambition, Sid passed the baton on to Richard Hamilton in 1981. It is fitting that after 175 vintages and 6 generations of a winemaking family, there is a Richard Hamilton back at the helm, guiding the family business that his namesake pioneered in 1838.
Of course, I could tell any aspiring young winemaker it's not that hard. Making wine, it's really quite easy, actually. All you need to do is empty your
bathtub and put the grapes in it and get your girlfriend or your wife to wash her feet and jump in and tread them all out. She doesn't need to be dressed for the occasion at all. And in 8 or 9 days, it's wine. You might have trouble in selling it.